for Mrs. Chanel Bradden. She has worked extremely hard to get to this point, and I just want to share a few housekeeping rules. Just make sure that your cameras are off and your mics are muted. Committee, after Chanel has finished defending, you will turn your cameras and mics back on so that we could have questions for Chanel. But again, thank you all for being here. Committee, thank you so much, Dr. Wiggum-Hayes and Dr. Reed, for serving on this committee. We really appreciate you. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chanel.
Thank you, Dr. Butcher. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can, and I can hear you, so I'll mute and turn my camera off.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chanel Bradden, and I'd like to thank you all for observing my dissertation defense. I'm excited to share the findings of my study entitled Under the Legal Lens, Navigating Psychological Safety and Conflict for Black Women in Legal Support Roles. But before I jump in, I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you to the people who helped me get to this point. A huge thank you to Dr. Butcher, my chair. Your encouragement, your thoughtful feedback really helped me to grow, not just as a researcher, but in how I found and used my voice. To Dr. Wiggum-Hayes and Dr. Reed, my committee members, thank you both for giving your time and energy to this very long, over 200-page document, and for your support throughout and helping me reach each of these milestones. To my amazing family, thank you for walking with me through every part of this journey and helping me to stay grounded. And of course, to my cohort, who's been my community, my accountability partners, and honestly, my biggest cheerleaders. So I truly couldn't have done this without any of you. Okay, so let me give you a quick roadmap of what I'll be covering today. I'll start with a short overview of the study, just to give some context around what I set out to explore and how I approached my research. Then I'll introduce you to the participants, the stars of the show, walk you through how I collected and analyzed the data, and share how I work to keep the research process trustworthy and grounded. From there, I'll break down the key findings, I'll connect them back to the literature, and talk through what all of this means for future practice and future research. And I'll wrap up with a few thoughts on the implications, limitations and delimitations of the study, and finally, I'll end with some reflections on what this journey has meant. So just to recap, the legal field is rooted in justice, but remains shaped by historical inequities. Historically dominated by wealthy white men, the legal field has seen key milestones in breaking barriers. However, while these efforts to address racial and gender disparities continue, challenges do persist. And that underscores the need for diversity in a fair legal system. And while attorneys and judges are often prioritized in legal settings because of their credentials, such as law degrees and bar admissions, legal support professionals fully understand that distinction. However, their contributions are frequently undervalued despite their expertise and the essential roles they play in legal operations. So this study centers the voices of legal support professionals to examine how leadership, culture, and equity are experienced in legal workplaces. And let me give you a quick overview of what led to this study. Black women in legal support roles face challenges that go beyond the job itself. It's not just about the workload, it's the added pressure of navigating bias tied to race, gender, and professional status. These layers often leave their experiences overlooked or lumped into broader categories that don't really reflect their realities. A recent report found that 66% of Black women don't feel emotionally safe at work, and that is a huge number. And in legal environments where power dynamics are sharp, that lack of safety can shape everything, from whether someone speaks up to how they're treated when dealing with conflict. Conflict is inevitable in the workplace, but for Black women, it's often rooted in bias and power imbalances. Racial microaggressions and poor conflict management can lead to burnout and silencing. Leaders who understand the deeper roots of conflict and approach it with cultural awareness can make a real difference. But what's more telling is the data. The legal field is still one of the least racially diverse. Over 80% of legal professionals are white, and only about 9% are Black. And that underrepresentation isn't just about numbers. It reflects systemic barriers, starting with legal education in law school and extending into workplace culture. So my study explored how all of these pieces come together, how identity, power, and leadership influence psychological safety and conflict for Black women in legal support roles. So here's the problem this study is explored. Black women in professional settings often find themselves navigating a tough intersection where race, gender, and professional hierarchy collide. Even with all the talk around diversity and inclusion, many of these women still experience workplaces where psychological safety just doesn't exist, especially when dealing with conflict. Leaders can either be a source of support or a source of harm. Their behavior matters, and too often their actions reinforce the very inequities that DEI efforts claim to fight. While existing studies discuss the experiences of Black women attorneys, the perspectives of this population aren't prominent in existing research. The purpose of this study was to explore how Black women in legal support roles experience psychological safety during workplace conflict. Specifically, I wanted to understand how leadership behaviors influence those experiences, whether leaders help to create safer spaces or in some cases make things worse. This was a qualitative, interpretive, phenomenological study, so the focus was on lived experiences, how these women make sense of conflict, identity, and power in the workplace, and what leadership support actually looks like from their point of view. There were 3 research questions that guided the study. Research question 1 explored how Black women in legal support roles navigate workplace relationships shaped by race, gender, and hierarchy, focusing on identity, trust, and belonging. Research question 2 examines how they defined psychological safety during conflict and the strategies they use to protect themselves when safety feels or felt compromised. Research question 3 looked at how they perceived leadership support, what actions felt meaningful, and how leaders either reinforced or challenged power dynamics during conflict. So these questions really helped me to better understand the complex dynamics of safety, conflict, and leadership for a population whose voices are often underrepresented in legal workplace research. The literature review focused on 5 key areas: the unique challenges of Black women in professional spaces, the legal field, psychological safety, workplace conflict, and leadership support. To understand the broader context of the study, it's important to start with the lived realities that Black women face in professional settings, realities shaped by both historical and systemic forces that continue to impact how they're seen, heard, and treated at work. Now let's narrow the focus down and look at the legal profession specifically, a field known for its hierarchy and lack of racial diversity. Black women in legal continue to face obstacles tied to race and gender, despite playing critical roles in the field. And with that context in mind, psychological safety becomes even more crucial. It's more than just a buzzword. It's about whether someone feels safe enough to speak up without the fear of backlash, especially in environments where identity already puts them at risk. Feeling safe to speak up is key, but for Black women, that safety is often compromised by racialized power dynamics and bias. But what happens when that safety is disrupted? Conflict. We know that workplace conflict is inevitable, but Black women often face it through a lens of bias, microaggressions, and limited trust in HR or formal channels to resolve issues fairly. And this brings us to leadership, because how leaders show up during conflict can either reinforce those harms or help disrupt them. Yet research still doesn't fully capture the impact of leadership behaviors on the safety of Black women in legal spaces. This study examines how all of these forces intersect in legal workplaces and builds on prior work focused mostly on attorneys and fills a critical gap by centering the lived experiences of Black women in legal support roles, exploring how they define psychological safety, what leadership support looks like to them, and how they navigate conflict shaped by race, gender, and status. This study drew from 3 key theories that form the theoretical framework, helping us to understand how identity, power, and conflict intersect in the workplace. Black Feminist Thought centers the lived experiences of Black women as valid knowledge, helping interpret how race, gender, and role impact voice and belonging. It essentially positions Black women as knowledge producers. Psychological safety theory guides the exploration of how identity affects one's ability to speak up and feel secure at work without the threat of negative consequences. Conflict theory helps to contextualize how power, hierarchy, and systemic inequalities can shape employee experiences with conflict, as well as institutional responses. I integrated these three theories to create a more complete picture of Black women's experiences and legal support roles. Black feminist thought helps to ground the study in identity. Psychological safety theory then pushes that conversation toward vulnerability, toward what it actually means to feel safe in a space. But where traditional models might stop at team dynamics, I use Black feminist thought to ask those deeper questions like, is safety even accessible for Black women in these roles? Conflict theory helped me to make those power dynamics more visible. It gave me the language to connect personal stories to organizational patterns and brings the power dynamics into focus by highlighting who gets heard, who's protected, and who is dismissed. Together, they move beyond surface level explanations and show how identity, power, and leadership can shape conflict. And ultimately, that's what makes this framework so powerful. It doesn't just name the problem, it shows us how, with the right support, conflict can become a catalyst for change rather than harm. I used a qualitative, interpretive, phenomenological approach to explore this phenomenon. And this method complements my theoretical framework by connecting macro level theories with the micro level personal insights of the participants. And this alignment was especially valuable for exploring intersectional experiences in complex legal environments. To participate in the study, individuals had to identify as Black or African American women who were currently or previously employed in an in-house legal department within the US. They also needed to have at least 5 years of experience in a legal support role that involved a high degree of autonomy and minimal attorney supervision. So I want to take a moment to share a little bit about my positionality because it really shaped how I approach this research. I approached this study as an educated Black woman who spent over 20 years in legal support roles. So this study wasn't just academic for me, it was personal. I've lived through some of the very dynamics that were discussed in the participant interviews. And with that said, I was really intentional about not letting my own voice overpower the voices of the women who shared their stories with me. I kept a reflexive journal throughout the process to track my own reactions and thoughts. And during the interviews, I made sure to stay present but neutral, listening and holding space without oversteering the conversation. My goal was to co-create meaning with care, to approach this work with both empathy and accountability, and to honor the trust that each participant placed in me by telling their stories as truthfully and respectfully as possible. So this study included a diverse group of participants with varying educational backgrounds, from some college to Juris Doctorate. They represented different legal environments, such as corporate, government, and nonprofit, with work experience ranging from under 10 years to over 25 years. They also came from multiple US regions and several held credentials, such as a paralegal certificate. Most of the participants held advanced degrees and worked in high responsibility roles like senior paralegals, compliance managers, and equity specialists, all requiring minimal attorney oversight. And more than half of the participants fell within the 50 to 59 age group. The participants also represented diverse industries, from government to hospitality to tech, and they all brought deep institutional knowledge and a wide view of workplace cultures. This slide also shows interview metrics. The average interview lasted about an hour and 15 minutes, with transcripts averaging approximately 9.5 pages. The pseudonyms were intentionally chosen to reflect the strength, resilience, and complexity of each participant's journey. Names like Resolve and Valor symbolize courage and perseverance, while others like Zenith and Solara evoked transformation and clarity. And then names such as Onyx and Solace reflected calm and individuality. So these pseudonyms weren't just identifiers, they were symbolic representations of the power, the insight, and the self-definition these women brought to the study. Data collection. Upon IRB approval, I sent solicitation emails out for purpose of sampling. I also posted my recruitment flyer on LinkedIn and Facebook. Out of 28 initial responses, one was flagged as a bot in Qualtrics, and that prompted me to enable bot detection through Google's invisible reCAPTCHA. I was able to do this in Qualtrics, and once I did this, I didn't receive any further bots. Another was excluded for working in the medical field rather than the legal field, which left 26 eligible participants. And of the 26, 15 scheduled interviews, and 11 completed interviews, forming the final sample. So 10 of the participants were found using purposive sampling and 1 with snowball. Using Qualtrics, after informed consent, participants completed a brief demographic questionnaire, followed by a semi-structured interview using a flexible guide to ensure consistency while encouraging rich and reflective storytelling. To protect participant confidentiality, I stored everything on a password-protected device and used pseudonyms from the start. I was the only person with access to the raw data, and I kept everything organized and clear, making it easier to manage while staying in full compliance with IRB guidelines. After transcribing all 11 interviews, I sent each participant their full transcript and invited them to review them for clarity or corrections. I heard back from 3 participants. 1 reached out to correct her age, and 2 others offered brief clarifications on a few statements to make sure that their points came across as intended. And before full coding, I conducted a preliminary review of all transcripts to start identifying patterns and emotional tone. And while this early engagement was helpful, I could have paid deeper attention to narrative overlap and divergence to further streamline the later stages of coding and theme development. So let me briefly walk you through how I moved from raw data to meaningful themes. Again, the study used interpretive phenomenology to deeply engage with participants' lived experiences, aligning with its focus on voice, identity, and meaning making. Braun and Clark's 6-phase approach guided the thematic development process. I used multiple tools, Otter AI for transcription, Excel for preliminary line-by-line coding, and Deduce to further code as well as refine and organize the codes. My coding and analysis process involved multiple steps. It was both iterative and layered. First, I familiarized myself with the transcripts, reading them multiple times to really absorb the tone and the meaning. Then I began initial coding, labeling patterns and insights that really stood out, guided by both what emerged from the data and my theoretical lens. Next, I grouped the related codes to form potential themes, refining and reviewing them to ensure that they were consistent and meaningful across all of the transcripts. After that, I defined and named each theme clearly, making sure they aligned with my research questions. And finally, I wrote up the findings, weaving participant voices and theory together. To ensure rigor, I maintained a detailed codebook and engaged in reflexive journaling to stay aware of my own lens. The analysis was iterative with multiple rounds of coding and theme refinement. I also used member checking to confirm accuracy and to honor the participants' voices throughout the process. I wanted to show a quick snapshot of how I used Excel during the early coding phase. So before diving into thematic analysis, I used Excel for line-by-line coding to stay really closely connected with the participants' words. And this allowed me to organize excerpts and assign initial codes. Excel was really invaluable in helping me to spot early patterns, compare data across transcripts, and set a strong foundation before transitioning to Deduce for deeper analysis. The sort and filter tools in Excel were really useful in this process. And after coding in Excel, I used Deduce to organize and refine the data. Its visualization tools help to track coding patterns and connect the excerpts to the participant demographics. I used Deduce also for manual coding, but it also supported theme development and added transparency and consistency to my analysis process. In qualitative research, trustworthiness ensures rigor. I address this using 4 key strategies: credibility through deep engagement, member checking, and reflexive journaling; transferability by offering rich descriptions so others can judge relevance; dependability with a clear audit trail and consistent coding; and confirmability by bracketing bias and maintaining reflexivity. The assumptions behind this study held up throughout the process. Participants were open and their stories were rich, consistent, and deeply aligned with the research questions. And while we can't fully verify truth in qualitative research, the depth and emotion across the interviews added trustworthiness. Member checking helped to confirm the credibility of their accounts. And this study assumed that meaning is co-constructed, and that proved true. Insights emerged not just from what was shared, but from how I engaged with it through my own lens as the researcher. And even with the small sample, the diversity of experience reflected broader patterns in the legal field. And while every story was unique, each one highlighted the complex realities of psychological safety, both the harm and the hope. So this study uncovered 4 key findings that really shaped how participants experience their work lives: psychological safety, leadership support, workplace conflict, and organizational culture. And I'm going to briefly touch on these. Psychological safety wasn't something participants could count on. It often depended on who had the power in the room. And many described staying quiet or working harder than everyone else just to avoid being labeled or penalized. Leadership support came up a lot, and not always in a good way. Most participants felt that support from leadership was more talk than action. What they really wanted was accountability and leaders who understood their identity, not just empty diversity statements. Workplace conflict was a regular part of their experience, and it was usually tied to bias or being overlooked. And because formal systems like HR didn't feel trustworthy, participants leaned on self-advocacy by speaking up when they could, documenting everything, or deciding when to let things go. Organizational culture was described as rigid, image-driven, and out of touch with their realities. Inclusion felt like a performance, and silence was sometimes rewarded over telling the truth. So together, these findings paint a clear picture. Identity, power, and structural dynamics deeply influence how Black women in legal support roles experience the workplace. This is an overview of the themes that emerged across the participant interviews, and they're organized according to the 3 research questions that guided the study. This illustration not only highlights what was most salient to the participants, but it also demonstrates how these themes are interconnected and rooted in broader systemic conditions. To add structure and show how widespread a theme was, I also documented how many participants contributed to each code. So if a theme contained 5 codes, I noted how many participants endorsed each one. And this helped me to assess whether a theme reflected isolated perspectives or cross-cutting patterns shared across multiple interviews. Now let me walk you through how my findings directly responded to each of the research questions. For research question 1, I explored how participants made sense of their workplace relationships while navigating race, gender, and professional status. And what stood out was how often they had to shift parts of their identity just to be seen as competent or non-threatening. Trust was fragile, and belonging often felt conditional. But still, they found ways to support each other by building networks and drawing strength from their shared experiences. For research question 2, psychological safety was far from guaranteed. Most participants described having to weigh the risk of speaking up during conflict. They often stayed silent, not because they lacked the skills, but because the power dynamics made it unsafe to be fully transparent. Conflict resolution wasn't a fair process. It often favored those with more institutional power. And many turned to strategies like documentation and emotional restraint as ways to protect themselves. For research question 3, when I asked about leadership support, the theme was inconsistency. Many said that support only came when it didn't disrupt the organizational image or hierarchy. Some leaders appeared supportive on the surface, but behind closed doors, they avoided difficult conversations. Even Black women leaders felt that they had to conform to organizational norms just to stay safe. And this highlights the importance of active, equity-focused leadership, not just performative allyship. So these findings reinforce that psychological safety, conflict, and leadership are deeply intertwined and shaped by identity and power in some very real ways. I wanted to briefly provide an overview of the 10 themes and how they connect to the study's theoretical framework. Again, for research question 1, their stories revealed how trust, identity, and advocacy were carefully negotiated in spaces that often demanded silence or conformity. And this directly aligns with Black Feminist Thought, which centers the lived experiences of Black women and highlights the strategies they developed to survive, resist, and assert agency within oppressive systems. With research question 2, participants shared that psychological safety was not a given. It was highly conditional and often absent in moments of conflict. Speaking up came with a risk, so many relied on protective strategies like silence, overperformance, or documentation. This reflects the core of psychological safety theory, which defines safety as the ability to take interpersonal risk. However, their experiences expand this framework through conflict theory, showing how structural power, racial identity, and organizational hierarchies mediate both the perception and experiences of safety. For research question 3, participants discussed leadership support, or the lack thereof, during moments of conflict. Many describe support as inconsistent, image-driven, or performative. And this highlights the need for identity-conscious leadership that acknowledges and responds to the power imbalances that Black women face. These findings reflect conflict theory, which examines how power and control influence social dynamics, and Black feminist thought, which critiques structures that marginalize Black women and calls for leadership that actively disrupts exclusionary practices. Each of these themes reflects not just what participants experienced, but how they make meaning of those experiences in relation to power, identity, and their place in the legal profession. So now I'm going to walk you through a set of quotes from the participants that will bring each of these themes to life, allowing you to hear their voices directly as they describe their lived realities. So the next series of slides will highlight selected quotes that illustrate the themes under the 3 research questions. Each slide will identify the research question number, the theme number, and the theme name. This quote illustrates a pivotal moment of identity affirmation, where Solara witnessed professionals who embraced their authentic Black identities in leadership roles. It reflected the internal negotiation that many Black women face between conforming to dominant workplace norms and expressing their full and cultural selves. This quote from Fowler captures the constant pressure to overperform or self-monitor to avoid negative stereotypes. It highlights the emotional and mental burden that Black women carry when navigating expectations to be perfect, agreeable, and tireless, often at the expense of their psychological well-being. This quote from Onyx reflects the emotional shift from perceived trust to betrayal. Her narrative highlights how unequal treatment and broken confidentiality eroded psychological safety she previously held with an attorney for over 15 years, which led to deep disillusionment and withdrawal of trust. And regarding collective uplift, this quote from Aurora speaks to the immediate, often unspoken bond that Black women form in predominantly white or non-inclusive spaces. It illustrates how shared identity fosters solidarity and mutual support, especially when dealing with marginalization. And for the final theme of research question 1, this first quote from Solara captures a powerful act of resistance, and I'd like to read it verbatim. The reality is that racism, inequality, and discrimination are not our problems to fix. They're problems that others created, that others continue to uphold, and that others benefit from. It's their responsibility to educate themselves and come up with solutions, not mine. This cannot be another burden placed on us. It's not our job to fix a system we didn't break. And this profound statement really speaks to the rejection of the expectation that Black women should shoulder the burden of fixing systemic problems that they did not create. It challenges the notion of emotional labor as an obligation, and it reframes accountability as a responsibility that belongs to those who uphold or benefit from injustice. This next quote from Momentum powerfully illustrates the dual burden that Black women carry in professional spaces, having to navigate both gendered and racialized hierarchies simultaneously. Momentum calls out how even the language used in diversity spaces like women and people of color implicitly erases Black women by separating their racial and gender identities. And by referencing Sojourner Truth's historic question, "Ain't I a woman?" she is asserting her full humanity and resisting the fragmentation of her identity. And this negotiation between being authentic and being accepted is constant. Black women are often expected to shrink parts of themselves or conform to frameworks that really weren't built with their realities in mind. And for many Black women, claiming that space as both Black and woman is an act of resistance, and it's a deeply personal negotiation of belonging. Here, Fowler describes the silent emotional labor of navigating unspoken expectations while suppressing her humanity. The psychological burden isn't due to a lack of ability, but the weight of having to constantly manage others' perceptions, which leads to internalized harm and emotional depletion. And this quote by Resolve reflects deep skepticism toward institutional structures that claim to protect employees. Resolve suggests that policies and ethics channels are performative, more about preserving organizational image and control than ensuring real accountability or justice. It exposes the gap between stated values and lived reality. This second quote from Sable offers a contrasting moment of affirmation and safety, where a supervising attorney recognized her value and encouraged her professional growth. And this underscores how supportive leadership can foster a sense of safety and confidence, even in a challenging environment. And this quote from Solara emphasizes the importance of psychological safety in fostering accountability and openness. She highlights how the fear of humiliation can lead to concealment, while a safe environment encourages honesty and transparency. And this underscores the emotional risk of being vulnerable in unsupported spaces and the collective benefits of prioritizing safety. So these quotes from Vega and Solara highlight how Black women in legal support roles often face resistance instead of recognition due to power dynamics, insecurity, and systemic bias. Rather than being seen as valued contributors, they're frequently perceived as threats or competition, leading to dismissal, misperceptions, and subtle forms of professional sabotage. Together, these insights underscore how achievement can be met with pushback, limiting advancement and reinforcing exclusion in the legal workplace. This quote from Zenith shows how power and gatekeeping operate through unspoken rules. Constantly adapting and proving oneself just to be respected takes a toll. It reveals how subtle forms of control, like communication norms or cultural fit, can undermine confidence and exhaust even the most capable professionals. This quote from Liberty presents an example of effective leadership in action. Liberty highlighted that when leaders took concerns seriously and addressed them professionally, it helped to build trust and it reinforced psychological safety, modeling the kind of responsiveness that employees need. And here, Solara reflects on the gap between the ideals of the law and how leaders actually practice it. Her words highlight a key finding. Ineffective leadership shows up when those in power don't model the fairness that the law represents. And this last quote from Liberty expresses a hopeful call to action, asking leaders to self-reflect and prioritize empathy. It reinforces the idea that leadership is not just positional, it's relational. And true leaders are those who listen, evolve, and actively support the growth and well-being for those that they lead. Now I'd like to briefly walk you through how the participants actually defined psychological safety, not in theory, but based on their real day-to-day experiences at work. For some, it meant not dreading work every morning or feeling anxious about what kind of treatment the day might bring. Others talked about being able to speak honestly, ask for help, or express frustration without being labeled, punished, or dismissed. A few participants noted that psychological safety isn't just about being included in initiatives. It's about not having to perform when companies suddenly care about social justice. Real safety means being left alone when needed, having space to breathe, and not having to constantly protect your image. One thing was clear: psychological safety for these women wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival, dignity, and being treated with basic human respect. It was about being able to show up fully without the fear of retaliation or misjudgment. And these powerful insights really gave life to the data and shaped how I understood the broader patterns in this study. This slide shares additional insights that emerged beyond the core research questions. Participants described using faith, boundaries, and self-advocacy to protect their well-being in environments where they felt devalued. And these reflections highlight how agency and inner strength are essential tools for navigating the legal workplace. And while these findings weren't part of the study's formal scope, they offer valuable context. These reflections show that navigating the legal workspace isn't just about surviving systems. It's about resilience and drawing on internal sources of strength to advocate for one's worth. So one of the biggest takeaways from the findings is that psychological safety isn't equal for everyone. For Black women in legal support roles, it was shaped by race, gender, and position. Many shared that they had to constantly manage their tone or silence their concerns out of fear of being labeled aggressive or incompetent. And many felt the need to silence themselves to avoid being dismissed, making safety feel conditional and tied to power. Conflict wasn't avoided due to lack of skill, but because outcomes typically favored those with more power, like attorneys or the participants' white colleagues. So instead of speaking up, participants often used protective strategies like silence, documentation, or disengagement, which reflected a deep distrust in formal resolution methods. Leadership support was seen as inconsistent and often symbolic. Leaders were more likely to protect higher status employees and avoid stepping in when doing so might disrupt the team optics. Even leaders from similar backgrounds were constrained by institutional expectations. Participants called for leadership that is not just inclusive in language, but actively aware of power and equity. Organizational cultures felt performative. DEI efforts look good on paper, but they rarely translate it into real change. Participants described an environment that valued optics over authenticity and that often dismissed or sanitized Black women's lived experiences, reinforcing feelings of exclusion and making authentic belonging even harder to access. Overall, these findings show that psychological safety, conflict, and leadership support are all deeply tied to structural inequities and power dynamics, and real solutions must address those roots. So how do these findings align with and even extend to current research literature? First, in relation to the experiences of Black women in professional settings, participant stories affirm Awad et al. And Burrell's findings on how intersectional bias leads to invisibility and dismissal of expertise. This study extends that by showing how power dynamics further devalue Black women's contributions. In relation to psychological safety, echoing Edmondson and others, the findings confirm that safety is shaped by power, but it also shows it is racialized and tied to job role, deepening insights from Ponce de Leon and Rosette and Johnson and Pietri on threats to identity and feelings of isolation when intersectionality meets psychological safety. Regarding leadership support, the participants perceived support as performative and unevenly distributed. This aligns with Bajwa et al.'s work on the importance of inclusive leadership and fostering safe environments, but also with Vardy's assertion that leaders who exhibit destructive leadership behaviors, such as bias, discrimination, and favoritism, undermine the confidence and psychological safety for Black women. The results of this study deepens this conversation by highlighting the perceived performative nature of some leaders, especially in the legal profession, where Boyce et al. And Lewis acknowledged that Black women are uniquely impacted by the dynamics of destructive leadership. For workplace conflict, participants expressed very little faith in formal resolution methods and instead relied on self-protection strategies. This reinforces Bajwa et al.'s research on the need for conflict management training that considers diverse perspectives, but also Wingfield's research on how Black professionals manage racialized labor. Moultrie et al. Highlighted that Black women in professional settings are disproportionately affected by workplace conflict if the environment lacks psychological safety. The study findings align with this assertion, tying it back to the lack of psychological safety due to power imbalances that highlight the emotional toll of navigating conflict without institutional support. And lastly, regarding organizational culture, participants described environments that were resistant to the acknowledgement of identity-informed inequities. This mirrors Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, Burrell and Woods' work on identity shifting as a protective measure, and Wang et al.'s findings on the importance for organizations to prioritize psychological safety in order to enhance employee well-being and workplace effectiveness. So these findings don't just confirm and align with existing research, they expand it. They show how power, race, and role intersect to shape the lived experiences of Black women in legal support roles. This study highlights the urgent need for systemic, leadership-driven, and identity-conscious change in legal workplaces. Here are some key recommendations for future practice. Organizations should establish clear expectations for inclusive, psychologically safe leadership. They should also move beyond performative DEI to structural change, like equitable pay, transparent promotions, and identity-based feedback metrics. Some participants even recommended for identity-conscious leadership training to begin as early as law school. Organizations should also revamp HR practices to include restorative conflict resolution that acknowledges power imbalances and racial dynamics. Feedback systems should also be audited for bias and fairness. Organizations should also design mentorship and sponsorship programs tailored to Black women in legal support roles, offering not just development, but advocacy. In addition, legal leaders should encourage structured collaboration between attorneys and legal support staff to help build mutual respect, reduce hierarchy, and elevate undervalued roles. So when we think about what this research means going forward, one thing is clear. We need more studies that take identity seriously. Research that compares experiences, looks at intersectionality, and truly centers who people are, especially in legal and professional spaces. First, we need more comparative studies that examine how psychological safety and workplace conflict are experienced across different professional roles and identity groups. This kind of research would help us to isolate the compounded impacts of race, gender, and positionality within legal hierarchies. Second, Future studies should integrate quantitative methods alongside qualitative ones. While this study provided rich narrative insight, large-scale surveys could measure trends across companies, departments, or even industries, and doing so could offer statistical visibility into patterns of exclusion, bias, or gaps in leadership support. Third, there's a need for longitudinal research, studies that explore how psychological safety and conflict management evolve over time, especially following key organizational changes like leadership turnover, DEI policy shifts, or restructuring. This would help determine whether institutional reforms lead to sustained change or simply temporary shifts in optics. And lastly, a critical opportunity lies in role-based conflict navigation research. We need to examine whether and how Black women attorneys and Black women in legal support roles experience conflict differently. Is professional status enough to protect them from the same risks, or does shared identity still mean shared challenges? These questions are essential to better understand how power, identity, and role status intersect, and to build workplace systems that truly promote belonging. Ultimately, future research must continue to center the voices of those most marginalized and bring an intersectional lens to the study of workplace dynamics. Only then can we move from theory to transformative change. I wanted to highlight how the findings not only inform theoretical discourse, but also offer actionable insights for workplace practice. Theoretically, this study extends Black feminist thought and intersectionality by showing how race, gender, and role intersect to shape psychological safety. It challenges the idea that safety is universal, revealing it as conditional and identity specific. Conflict often became a survival response, and this advances theories around resistance and microaggressions. Practically, the findings call for identity-conscious leadership that goes beyond performative DEI. Organizations must address racialized silencing, gatekeeping, intentional exclusion, and power imbalances through culturally responsive conflict resolution methods, structured mentorship, and equity-focused leadership development. Inclusion must be more than a policy. It must validate lived experiences and actively support marginalized professionals. And as with any research, this study had both limitations and delimitations that shaped its scope as well as interpretation. As a Black woman with 20 plus years in the legal field, my positionality may have influenced how I interpreted participant stories. But while full objectivity is difficult in qualitative research, I used Black feminist thought to embrace instead of minimize these lived experiences. Participant data was self-reported and shaped by memory and emotion. To ensure transparency, I used an audit trail to document how data evolved into themes. And discussing sensitive topics like racism and psychological harm was also challenging. Some participants processed the weight of their experiences during the interview itself. So I created a confidential and supportive space and reminded them that they could skip questions or stop at any time. Delimitations. This study intentionally focused on Black women in legal support roles, not attorneys or any other demographic. And this was to center the experiences of this population. It was limited to in-house legal departments in the US to maintain consistency in workplace dynamics. And the focus was on psychological safety during workplace conflict, not broader topics like compensation or general job satisfaction. And finally, I used qualitative interviews only to explore lived experiences in depth. So these boundaries ensured a focused and purposeful exploration of the research questions. As I close, I want to honor the voices of the very brave Black women who shared their stories. Their experiences remind us that conflict reveals deeper issues in culture and leadership. This study challenges us to lead with intention, recognizing that psychological safety is shaped by race, gender, and power. Inclusion isn't just a value, it must be practiced. So what I'm presenting here is not a conclusion, it's a beginning. It's a call to action, it's a roadmap for reflection, and it's a commitment to transforming how we lead, how we listen, and how we lift others. And as I close, I want to take a moment to share a deeply personal reflection. This work, every page, every interview, every late night of writing was done with the spirit of two generations in mind. First, I honor my mother, Lavinia Smith, who passed away on February 5th. She was the foundation of my strength, graceful, wise, and unshakable. Her love, her sacrifices, and her belief in education shaped the woman that I am. I carry her legacy in every word of this research, and I dedicate this milestone to her memory. I also want to honor my daughters, Melia and Maya. They are my future. Watching them grow reminds me why this work matters, not just for today's workplace, but for tomorrow's world. I want them to know that their voices, their safety, and their brilliance deserve to be protected and celebrated. So this research was about justice, identity, and voice, but it was also about love. Love for the women who came before me and a fierce hope for the women who will come after me. And I want to thank you all for being part of this journey with me. Here are my references. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chanel. Excellent job. Your findings were just wonderful and such a great dedication to your mom. And I know she's smiling down and very
Yeah.
proud.
Thank you.
Awesome job. Good job.
Yes. So now we will hear from the committee. Dr. Reed.
Yeah. Awesome job, Chanel. So
And
much.
Chanel, you can stop sharing if you like. Thank
Thank
you.
So much depth. That baby girl of yours looked just like her grandma, or just like you, because you look like your mama. She does. She does. Do you mind if I go?
Go ahead, Dr. Reed.
Dr. Hayes? Okay, it's okay if I go. That was one of the most in-depth qualitative studies I've seen in a while. I like that you focused on that psychological safety part because what we do is sometimes we remain silent too much, I think. And it is because we are, I agree with you that we're afraid of the repercussions that we think, true or false, that we might have to experience if we do speak up, I think.
you.
To the point that we don't speak up. So I liked how you talked about that a lot, especially among women. Sometimes I'm amazed though at when, as women, sometimes I'm amazed at the responses that we get from other women when, as women, we do speak up or we decide that we're not going to tolerate some of the what am I going to call it? I'm going to call it injustices. There probably is some other word I should be using that we face in our workplaces or in workplaces that we feel like that we apply for sometimes. And we just determine that that's not where we want to be because of some of the things that we perceive that might happen and
Right.
some of the responses that we get back from either other women that they say things like, oh, you talked yourself out of that job. Well, maybe that's not where you're supposed to be.
Right.
And sometimes we have to give up some things because not all money is good money sometimes.
Right.
But sometimes we have to speak up for ourselves. Um, but but instead of saying, well, you have to make the decision for yourself, whether that's a good decision for where you are in your place of life where you are, then that's why you made that decision. But anyway, that's what was going through my head when you were talking about that. You talked about, I was writing myself notes here about our own identities, and I was writing about sometimes how other women respond to other women who make those decisions. How did you know, this is the other part, how did you know that one of your participants was a bot?
So, I love setting up my demographic questionnaire in Qualtrics. So when they started when people, I got 28 responses. One of them had a flag on it when I went to check. So I looked at the description, and Qualtrics actually flagged it as a bot. So
Oh,
I looked it up, and I looked at the Qualtrics information, and they said that a lot of people get bots, in research, especially quantitative. You get lots of bots. They have a feature in Qualtrics that allows you to add the safety so that you don't get them. You have to set the recaptcha where people have to click, I'm not a robot. And once I click
yeah.
that, I didn't get any more bots, but Qualtrics actually flagged that before I even enabled that feature.
I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Okay, so I learned something new. I didn't, yeah, I didn't know that. When I saw that in your paper, I thought, how does she know that that was a bot? Okay, I didn't. I learned something new then. Keep living and you learn. But you got a lot of responses for a qualitative study. That's good. So you're the people, you got a lot of people, participants who responded for a qualitative study. But that was one of the most in-depth quantitative studies I've seen, like I said, in a while. So way to go. That's great.
Thank
Great,
you.
great work. Lots of work.
Can I respond to your first comment on psychological safety?
Yeah.
The silencing. What surprised me in this study was the women with more years of experience use silence more
Mhm.
as a survival strategy than the ones who had lesser years. And it was because of emotional exhaustion, just from reading the
Yeah.
transcripts and interpreting that. They just like, if this is not worth it, I'm just going to move on. Like, I'm not going to fight this battle. I know how this plays out. But I was really driven to study psychological safety.
Mhm.
That's why I even entered the doctoral program, because of an experience I had. I'm like, we need to talk more about this, especially for
Yes.
this demographic.
You're absolutely right. I hear my daughter talking about psychological safety. She's a health and safety engineer for the American Red Cross. But she was for a pharmaceutical company and then for a food services company before that, that drove her crazy almost, that food services company. But anyway, I hear them talking more about psychological safety. And I guess as the younger people are in different companies, or maybe companies are talking about it more, I think, about psychological safety. And I noticed in the org lead part of ACU, in that part of the doctoral program, psychological safety is coming up more as a discussion. And it's good because before I didn't hear about it that much, but it's a really, really important piece of how we work, like in DWERK. I think it's Dwyer's work on dying for a paycheck.
Mhm.
Psychological safety comes up a lot in her work. And there are lots of TED Talks about how people work until they're pretty much die because they're sick because of issues around psychological safety,
Exactly.
getting sick and literally having heart attacks and
Yes.
high blood pressure and all that because they're so stressed out at work.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. Uh,
Yeah.
Dr. Wiggum?
Yes. First of all, congratulations on such a phenomenal study. Oh my goodness. The way you have become an expert on psychological safety, I thought you coined the phrase. So, so I'm like, okay, you got this one. And thank you for touching on your participants as well, because I did have a question. Like, I know you're talking about based on the experience, the lived experiences that they have. So, because I kept noticing, it's like Solara, she had a lot to say, and she commented on a lot of things. So I'm like, okay, she's deep in the trenches, or either she's new, so she hadn't been burned out yet. So, did you really see, in terms of your participants, that pattern of behavior based on how long they've been in the game?
Yes, I did. That's an excellent question. The participants with, I would say, more than 15 years of experience had so many different experiences. Like, it was really hard for me to even choose the quotes to put in this presentation,
Mm-hmm.
because they have had both good and bad experiences, but just the volume. I mean, my transcripts total over 100 pages, over probably close to 200 pages, because of all of the experiences. But the ones with more years in the legal field, have experienced different types of attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And well, actually, you didn't ask this question, but since you asked that question, I was surprised that most of the ones who have been in the game for over 20 years, their best mentors and leadership support came from white male attorneys.
Mm.
And the worst experiences were from white female attorneys. And so if I put these quotes together, I could tell a really good story in a book to show how when you look at Vega and Solara, who mentioned the competition feeling people being threatened by them, and then you look at Momentum, who says, white men are the default in legal and they always will be. Well, they can be supportive leadership because they're not threatened. Their job is to find the best talent. They don't care what you look like if they don't lead with bias. So they
Nice.
want the best talent. So yeah, they're going to give you the promotions. They're going to give you the good roles because they know you can perform. So it was really clear to me that even though the ones in the game for over 20 years had a lot of experiences, they also built the strongest survival strategies that work for them.
Nice. Thank you for that, because as you were talking, I wrote that down. I was like, wow, I wonder, because like I said, I kept seeing Solara's name come up. So I was like, okay, she had a lot to say. Also with your theoretical framework. Okay, so your theories, your Black feminist theory, your psychological safety theory, and your conflict theory. Did they already come packaged, or did you did you come up with each theory to create your overall theoretical framework?
I started working on this framework from the beginning of my program back in April of 2022. I knew psychological safety would be one of them.
Okay.
Because I researched it, the tenets, I'm like, this fits. Black feminist thought was a given, I thought, because of that. I needed to tie psychological safety to a specific demographic that I wanted to study. Conflict theory, I'm a concentrationist conflict resolution. And I knew that once I started to look at Black feminist thought and psychological safety theory, the power dynamics in the legal field are so strong. I needed to include that kind of structural inequalities, and conflict theory was the way to do that. And conflict theory is also what will shape societal change. If people really read that theory and see what it's all about, I believe we can bring about societal change just from reading. So that's why I wove those three together, because I was trying to connect the dots. And in the beginning, I had another one in there, and Dr. Butcher is like, team too much. So I had to settle for these three.
Well, the reason I asked that, because the overall end result, you've created your own theoretical framework that can go out there and present itself. So I'm like, name it, because what you've done when you put those three together and you came up with that end result, that theoretical framework, I mean, I would give it a name. You know, Chanel theory, something, but but it was outstanding. And just my last question is, when do you go on a speaker circuit? Because this was phenomenal.
I was just telling Dr. Butcher that my proposal was accepted to present at the Diversity in Organizations next
Oh, awesome.
April in
Nice.
Mexico. I have
Okay.
2 more proposals out, and I'm always on the hunt. Dr. Butcher told me about one beginning of this call, and I already have a list of publications that I want to submit articles to, kind of like extracting different pieces of it. Yeah.
You know,
Outstanding.
AERA is still open.
That's
Did you know
that's the
that?
one I told her about, and to
You tell the
submit under,
AERA?
yeah, and submit under RWE, the SIG.
Yeah, she could do that, but the AERA isn't closed till the 30th.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
She could submit to that. Um, I meant to tell you too, Chanel, your topic is unique also to look at the legal field, even though your topic can fit like several fields to talk about it, like for under the legal lens, as you called it. It's unique,
Mm-hmm.
so that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
It can fit under legal, medical, education,
Yeah, it can fit
you're
under a lot. Yeah.
absolutely correct.
hmm
Yes.
But I
Mm-hmm.
like that she called it the legal lens because it
Mm-hmm.
stands out from the other
Absolutely.
topics that we see most of the dissertations under. Yeah.
Because in the beginning, I was searching for dissertations about this population, and I just couldn't find any. I couldn't find.
No,
I'm like, where's the research on this population or any paralegal, to be honest?
no, you're not going to find it. Yeah. I don't think you will. I mean, it might be out there somewhere, but not easily
Not easy.
find it. Yeah.
You know, I like your acknowledgement and use of AI. So I thought you did a phenomenal job with that. So congratulations with that as well.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah. Committee, thank you both for your comments. Chanel, I have a few questions for you. And to add to what Dr. Williams said about the theory, and I know you reached out to me, Chanel, to say, can I develop my own theory? And I talked to Dr. Reed about, the grounded theory, and we tell students, that could take a little while. You can expand on your research, and I think you're wanting to do that. And maybe do the twist. And Dr. Reed, we could help her with that, to do the grounded theory, since she's not rushing now. She'll be finished. She'll be Dr. Bradden. So we could definitely work on that piece. But Chanel, a couple of questions for you. Were you surprised by any of your findings?
Um, mainly two. One was what I brought up about the majority of the participants feeling safety most with white male attorneys. So it seemed counterintuitive to me. So when I started scrubbing the transcripts again, I'm like, oh, now I can connect it. Like they're not threatened. They're the default in their minds.
Wait,
That's
say that again. Say that again, Chanel, about what?
the white male attorneys providing the most psychological safety to most of the participants. Because when I started to go through all of the transcripts and weave the quotes together, I interpret it as white male attorneys are the default in the legal field. So they aren't as easily threatened by anyone. So they're
Yeah.
going to look for the best talent to do the job. And I think Sable even mentioned that her attorney supports her and has confidence in her because she's a Black woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that surprised me. And also I was really surprised by the more experienced legal support professionals using silence as a survival strategy as much as they
Yeah.
did. I understand it because I've been in that position, but it surprised me that when you amass that level of expertise and you're still not given the respect, it,
Yes.
it silences you. It did. Dr. Reed, you mentioned that before. It really silenced you. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to go where I'm valued, where I'm respected, where I
Yeah.
grow.
Yeah. I run into that often. And then I don't be silent. So then I just say it, and then I'm like, whatever, y'all's lost. But then, yeah, but I can do that male thing because I know even in the public school, it was the white male that promoted me most.
Mhm.
And I can see that happen.
Yes.
If when I worked under white male principals, they were the ones that promoted me,
Yep.
not the female, white
Right.
female. I never had the opportunity to work under the black male. I've interacted with the black males, but they didn't promote me.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was the white
The
male
white
who
means-
did. Yeah, only one black male promoted me, but he was a school board member. Yeah.
Okay, one other question, Chanel. Since you've been in the program, and I know if you had courses and then working on your dissertation, I always like to hear the glows and grows. If you could share one glow, something that just stood out to you during your time in the program, and then one grow, just an opportunity for improvement for the program.
What stood out most for the program is my very first course was a leadership course, and it charged the students with self-reflecting on their leadership style and who they are as a person. And that kind of channeled my energy throughout this entire program. It caused me to self-reflect in other areas of my life as well. And when I read, before I started this program, I applied to 3 different programs. And I looked at the coursework and I really admired the structure of ACU's doctoral program in conflict resolution. And that's what drew me to this school. The emphasis on understanding who you are and making yourself better before you can go out and lead others or deal with conflict resolution was a major plus. Where I think it could be better is I think the prospectus seminars can be structured a little differently to allow more time to be spent on writing the chapters. I was okay because I stay ahead. I stayed ahead of everything just because you never know when life is going to happen, like February. But a lot of the students were challenged because they didn't have a chair like Dr. Butcher and they were being ghosted. They just weren't getting the support they needed. And the prospectus instructors were really good, but I could tell that they were limited in the support, in the feedback. So I think that needs a little bit of an adjustment because, you know, as a cohort, we try to help one another. And some of the cohort are really struggling.
Thank you. We always look for those comments. Now, there was a quote that stood out to me, and I think for everybody on this call, they probably had a quote that they could leave with today. And the one that stood out to me was that it's not our job to fix a system we didn't break. And I know we could all relate to what the participants noted. Is there one quote that stood out to you, Chanel?
That's one. There were three, actually. All of the, it's hard to pick, but that quote, the quote where Momentum quoted Sojourner Truth, that really gave light to, and I've never really thought about people saying women and people of color, the way that she shaped that discussion. So that was really profound to me. And also when Vega mentioned the competition and feeling threatened, because I've had that experience where, you know, I come to you with all of this expertise, and instead of like using that to help build your team and, you know, give your team like solid ground, you feel threatened by me because you don't have as much functional knowledge as me. Because I can relate to almost everything that these participants state because they are me and I am them. So those are the three that stood out the most.
Thank you. And I know, like I said, we could all leave today with a quote that stood out to us, but this study just applies. It hits all areas, like Dr. Reed said, not just the legal field, but all areas. And I think we probably could all relate to some of these issues. So thank you so much for your time and the hard work that you put into this. And you finished before you thought you were going to finish, but you did it, and we are so proud of you. And at this time, I would like to thank your visitors for joining us today, and I'm sure that they are very proud of you, and we're going to ask them to leave at this point, and just thanks again for being with us for Chanel's Defense.
Thank you all.
Hey.
And we have two more.
Send her a message.
Is that your sister?
Yes, let me send her a message.
Okay.
She said, I'm not getting off.
If she's having trouble, I can't remove her, but I'll wait and see if she could log off.
You can remove her. I sent her a message.
Okay. Okay, so we have everybody out. So let me go ahead and I'm going to pause the recording. And okay, we are back, and we have come back with our decision. And congratulations, Dr. Chanel Bradden, you did it. We are so proud of you. You successfully
Yes, ma'am.
dissertation.
Thank you.
Did
Thank you.
excellent job. Excellent, excellent.
And I'm sorry to say they didn't have any feedback for you to make changes in your dissertation. So we'll just wait and see what the Writing Center comes back with when you do your editorial review. I mean, it was like good.
Yeah.
so much.
That's all we have for you, girl, with that much detail.
I
Nothing.
enjoyed writing this. This was a heart piece for me because it made me understand I wasn't alone in what I experienced. But you know, some of the interviews were emotional.
Mhm.
I don't know that I was prepared for the level of emotion that I would feel from someone because they were in the thick of it.
Mhm.
So that was a challenge, but I felt that I really grew as a researcher in those moments.
Wonderful.
They were probably glad somebody was asking them.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
Some of them were like,
That's
yes,
lovely.
interview me tomorrow. Sign me up. People need to know.
Yeah,
Like ready
they were happy for that. Yeah.
for the voice.
That is great. Now, I know you shared that you had like over 20 something responses. How did you narrow it down? And I know we finished asking questions, but how did you narrow it down to the ones you wanted to interview?
Um, well, some of them that wanted to interview, people who reached out to me, they just, things, life happened. Oh,
Okay.
my mom is in a hospital. I just don't have the time. So it was kind of like, and then I stopped it at 11. I asked Dr. Butcher early on, can I have more than 10? And she said, don't have more than 12. So I capped it at 11 because I had the data. I had the data after like 5, I think. But with every other interview, I got more insights, more codes. And I just couldn't believe, I felt like I hit the jackpot
Hmm.
with so much.
You
I had
did.
like 1,100 codes in the beginning,
Wow.
but that was my fault. And I mentioned when I was doing my preliminary review, I didn't pay careful enough attention when I was assigning. I just went crazy. Oh, this code, instead of looking at the codes I already have. So it
Mm-hmm.
took me 2 weeks to narrow it down to the codes that I ended up with.
Wow.
Hmm.
But it was great. Committee members, you have any closing remarks for Dr. Braden?
Just congratulations, girl. You did this.
Thank you.
So, so Chanel will graduate do y'all do summer?
No, she'll participate in commencement in December, but
December? Oh, girl, we
yeah,
can just sit
so
back and chill now.
yeah, summer two, yeah, because we're going into summer two. Summer two, she'll go through the editorial review,
Yeah.
and and that should be approved by the end of the summer. And then during the fall, while you're waiting for commencement, you can work on some publications.
Yes.
Yeah. And make sure you get all those proposals in
Yeah.
for those, what you call it? Those, what am I trying to say?
The
Like
conference.
AERA, RWE. Yeah. Hmm.
And what you can do, Chanel, is also look for speaking engagements other than conferences, like maybe, I don't know, in your legal field, somewhere where you could just go and speak and advocate for women or something. But we want you to get this study out there.
Okay. I
Okay.
am on it.
Well,
ICPEL,
congratulations, Dr. Braden.
RWE is due August 8th. It's in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Okay.
And ICPEL is virtual. It's due on,
I think it's past, is it,
it's past due.
I
It's
think,
virtual. Yeah.
I think the deadline is passed for that
It's
one.
passed. Yeah. Okay. AERA proposal, it's due in July. The proposal isn't due till July something. Must be
Okay.
July 30th.
Okay.
And the AERA is in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now I just want to say congratulations, Dr. Braden. I'm so excited for you.
Thank
No
you.
Can't
kidding.
use that theory, but look, let me go ahead and retract that. However, I'm like, I am so excited. But I know you're gonna come up with something. So continue to research
Mhm.
because you have something wonderful here. Like I said, you have a masterpiece here. So I'm
Yeah.
so excited for you,
Right.
and thank you for letting me be a part and reading and throughout as I was reading, there was never a doubt that it was going to end how it was going to end up because you were on it from the very beginning. So
Thank you.
And
It's so
yes, Dr.
detailed.
Braden, I forgot to mention you passed with distinction, which is
Oh, yeah.
highest, and we don't
Yeah,
have
you did. That's
too
the
many
highest.
students to pass with distinction, but you passed with
Oh,
distinction.
thank you.
Yeah. We forgot to say that, all three of
Yes,
us. Yeah.
but
and
yeah, you didn't just pass, you passed with distinction. It
You
said,
yeah,
did
oh, yes, now you'll have to call her Dr. Mom.
Mom.
That's right.
Ah.
Dr. Mom.
Instead of
Yeah,
Mandy, she calls me
congratulations to
Mandy.
you too, Dr. Butcher, because
Yeah, that's right. Having a
I want to
strong
be like
student.
you.
That's
I
right.
said I want to be like you.
Okay. Well, thank you all, and y'all have a great evening. Dr. Brayton, you go out and celebrate.
Thank
That's
you.
right. Or go to sleep. I'd be going to sleep.
All right, y'all have a good
Great,
evening.
then sleep. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.